on the future of food through social innovation, how we can use food and agricultural innovation as a tool to create a stronger, much healthier, sustainable, ethical community and economy for the wider community and our environment. Now, let me try and paint a scene for you. If the world's population grows to 10 billion by 2050, or in my personal opinion, even 2030 at this point, as projected, the world will need to produce 70% more food than it is producing now. Increasing in agriculture and deforestation necessary to do so will result in a catastrophic increase in greenhouse gas pollution. So to address this growing crisis, we need to transform food systems at the start and ensure that the solutions posed are innovative, scalable, and sustainable for a better future. Hi, I'm Nanisha Rajidre, your moderator for today, and I'm the founder of New Tribe, which I'm very excited to share with you all. Is an upcoming social enterprise that aims to educate the local community of Melbourne and eventually beyond on how to implement the planetary health diet through a revolutionary interactive educational platform and meal plan service, really for the betterment of the people and the planet. It's my newfound life's mission and vision and passion project for a better food future. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. The link should be on the chat now, or follow New Tribe on socials to learn so much more about the planetary health diet and how you can implement it. Before I introduce you all to today's panel discussion, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community in the spirit of reconciliation. And I'm sure you all join me in paying my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. I invite you all to check out this website in the chat to share which original Aboriginal land you currently come from. I am currently in Boon Wrong land. Now on to introductions of today's panelists. Uncle Dave, would you like to start us off?
Yes, thank you very much, Nanisha. And thank you for that acknowledgement as well. I really appreciate that. And I think it is very important that we do know whose country, the unceded lands of where we might be working, living or playing, or indeed taking resources from. My acknowledgement is the form of a welcome. I don't speak much language, but I speak the language of the land. And I think that all us people that are here today have some sort of connection with. Well, Minjiga, Wurundjeri Biak, which simply means welcome to Wurundjeri country. I pay my respects to my ancestors and my elders, both past and present, for the knowledge that they have been able to pass down to me, that I can pass on, not only to my children and my grandchildren, but for the broader community that call Australia home, that I can share this knowledge, that it will be used respectfully as we move forward into the threats that we have to the human race around the world. And I pay my respects to all other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that are with us today, again, for the exchange of knowledge between myself and them that I can, again, share with everybody else. It is only by walking country together and understanding, not only from the scientific view or what we see in the present day, but to understand what happened in the past, that we can actually heal country together. And it's only by healing country that we can start to heal ourselves as people. And then we can all truly call ourselves Australians. My name is Dave Wandin, and I'm an elder of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung Tribal Land Corporation, but also elder and chairperson of the Wandoon Estate Aboriginal Corporation, which has responsibility for caring of the land which was formerly known as the Corranderk Mission Station, the first political movement for Aboriginal land rights, for Aboriginal justice. Now, that's not what we do at Wandoon Estate now. What we do is we grow food. And we grow food the way that our ancestors did, to the best of our knowledge. Understanding that as we go towards climate change, and population growth, as Nanisha pointed out. That instead of looking at what we can do, where we can get more fertilisers from, what other foods we can bring into this country, why aren't we looking at the foods that sustained the Aboriginal people for thousands and thousands of years, that don't need extra fertilisers, don't need fencing, don't need weed control. They just need to be respected. And I hope that as far as this food for thought goes, that there are many, many things that we can grow quite easily without any extra input from other resources. If we start to look at, study, understand and enjoy the foods that this land has always given us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uncle Dave. That was very good. And now on to Rebecca Scott to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Beck Scott, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Social Enterprise Street. I was really proud, I guess, to come and end up on Wurundjeri land, on your land, Uncle Dave, having been raised in Awabakal, on Awabakal land up near Newcastle, but I moved down here to Melbourne in 2009 to start the social enterprise that I run. We have been in the food industry since 2009 here in Melbourne, and using the food industry particularly to create social justice particularly for young people who have been facing a whole heap of kind of barriers to employment and issues. So we use food essentially for social justice in the first instance, to create training and employment pathways for young people. So far, we've worked with over 600 young people in this first decade here in Melbourne, but also too, we're passionate environmentalists and want to make sure that we're doing that. We're in the food system in a regenerative way. So I'm interested in kind of where people and planet kind of come together in our food system, and where we can do fair and regenerative work together. I'm also the coordinator and person who kind of catalyzed a bigger collective of food social enterprises to start working together on a project called Moving Feast. So last year, 15 food social enterprises started collaborating together, and we've now got multiple years of work of different projects that we've got on the boil, that we're doing anywhere from circular economy and waste projects through to training and employment pathways, through to opening up new land for growing in urban environments, through to I'm trying to think of the other areas as well. Yeah, food, retail products. So I'll talk a bit about some of the collaborative work that we're doing as well. So I'm wearing two hats, both my street hat and also the bigger social enterprise movement of groups working together in the food system. Thanks, that's me.
Thank you so much, Beck, and that was beautifully said. And she's probably being a bit modest, but she's a leader in so many more corporations that I truly admire. Now, next to is Emma Coate. On to you.
Hi, Nanisha. Thank you for having me in this session. I'm also talking to you from the land of the Bunurong people, and which I believe has just been rezoned. So I hope that's not offensive to anyone. And so I'm the managing director of Rocket Cedar, and actually I know Gert he did our inaugural program in 2017, and we support early stage startups in the food and agriculture sector. I'm also the interim CEO of the Australian Agritech Association, so wear a couple of hats at the moment. And although I guess my role is quite focused on commercial, if you like, issues, I think I've been involved in the food and agriculture sector for the last 25 years. And so it's been the passion of mine, I guess, an interest of mine from a long time ago to look at the sector through the sustainability lens. And the social, I guess there's a big focus on environmental at the moment and climate, and as there should be, but social is also something that is very much an important part of our food system and globally. And you can see in my background, I have some of the Sustainable Development Goals there. So making a bit of a statement here. I'd like to sort of encourage people to think globally, not just locally, about our food system, and also, I guess, you know, it's interesting. I was a judge for the UN Food System Summit SME competition, and just looking at the applications from different parts of the world and different countries, I could just see more, I guess, similarities rather than differences, and most of those similarities were around the social issues. So I think that we've got a lot to learn from each other, including our Indigenous peoples here in Australia. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Emma, and that was greatly said. And finally, we have Gert. On to you.
Hey, thanks, Anisha. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity for being here, and very exciting panel to be a part of. So yeah, my name is Geert Hendricks. I'm the founder and CEO at Farmall, and Farmall, we've been around since 2016 on a mission to transform our cities into food producing ecosystems. We're predominantly developing educational tools to educate about sustainable food production and closed loop food growing, and we use a lot of like aquaponics and like urban agriculture and permaculture and methodologies in that mindset, but also looking at ways how we can grow food in our cities in an efficient and productive way. Yeah, I'm super excited about what we just mentioned, what was just spoken about before, about where the world's heading. It seems like the goals, the sustainable development goals on a global level, but also on a local level, like a lot of organizations are moving towards similar concepts towards social and environmental outcomes. So yeah, very excited about partaking in this panel discussion today. And yeah, Farmall is located on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people and the Kulin Nation. And yeah, I'm famous perspective, the elders, past, present, and emerging as well.
Thank you so much, Gert. And you know, like just a bit, like I've had the pleasure of seeing Farmall at previous events like Melbourne Knowledge Week, and it's just astounding what they do. I really encourage you all to follow on their journey and hopefully get your own Farmall as well. So let's move on to the panel discussion. So first question for the panelists: what is your view on our current food system here in Australia and how it compares to other global countries? And to provide some context, according to Oxford Martin program of The Future of Food, the food system is a complex web of activities involving the production, the processing, the transport, and consumption. Issues concerning the food system include the governance and economics of food production, its sustainability, the degree to which we waste food, how food production affects the natural environment, and the impact of food on individual and population health. Basically, a food system encompasses all the stages of keeping us fed, which is about growing, harvesting, packing, processing, transforming, marketing, consuming, and disposing of food. So I'd like to hear from Uncle Dave on what he has to say.
Yeah, this is not a specialty of Aboriginal people. When I say Aboriginal people, you know, prior to colonisation, where we didn't move around the country. We learned to look at the resources that were available to make sure that we didn't overuse them, so then we became reliant on other countries. When I say other countries, I'm talking about other Aboriginal mobs within Australia. Now, understandably, we didn't have the population that we have today. But even so, there is so much land and so much opportunity that is still out there where foods can be harvested from. but they do need to be managed. We've lost a lot of our farming tools. And when I say our farming tools, it's the animals that as species that we've lost who actually did a lot of our gardening, our turning over of the soil. So therefore, as we had the reduction in numbers of native animals and the reduction of the opportunity for Aboriginal people to go out there and farm the land, that a lot of the foods have declined, or to use a word called rewilding. So a lot of the plants that we look at today, and they go, oh, yeah, but that seed is too small, or that tuber, you know, that yam, that potato, that carrot, that wild parsnip, oh, they're all too small and they're not commercially viable anymore. That's simply because they've been left to go wild. If you look at on a worldwide scale and think about our most common for Europeans of flour or wheat. Now, they will say that the Egyptians, were the leaders in wheat and made the first loaf of bread around 8,500 years ago. But in actual fact, we know that we've proved now that we've been, Aboriginal people have been making bread for 30,000 years using a grass that is actually fairly common all across Australia. And yet, if it is utilised, it's sold as lawn. We have a native rice, same thing. It's sold by Bunnings as lawn seed. It's not actually looked at as a food.
Yeah.
There are many things that are being ignored in this country that don't use up the resources as far as transport, don't require on the importation of herbicides or indeed fertilisers. In actual fact, fertilisers are the worst threat to native foods, or native plants in general. And I'm wondering, as we see that our big commercial crops are failing or are using, per hectare, more and more tonnage of fertiliser or litres of herbicide or whatever it might be, that we're not looking to return those to see what the land used to provide and starting innovatively how we can start to commercialise our crops, which need less labour, less fertiliser, less herbicides, and most importantly, less irrigation.
Yeah.
All of native plants, well, I won't say all of them. I mean, we've got wetland plants in our rainforests, and that's where they belong. But predominantly what we got down here in Victoria on our open grasslands, the things that we can grow require less than 1% of 1% of what's currently used in commercial cropping. And this is what I'm trying to demonstrate at my little 200-acre property in Hillsville, of how we can do this with no machinery, no mechanical machinery whatsoever, no introduction of herbicides or fertilisers or indeed extra water. If we do need extra water, how can we start to look at sustainably harvesting our rainwater, recycling our stormwater or collection and treatment and therefore redistribution, and including wastewater, in other words, our sewage, and where we can actually implement that as well. So there are many things that we can do as we move towards climate change. And as much as we're relying on science to give us the answers, we are still going to have to adapt to climate change.
Yeah.
By the time technology catches up to what climate is doing to us, their threats will be actually much larger, very much like what we're just going through now with COVID. But there are things that we can do now. There is technologies available right now that we can use. So that's what I'm hoping to do with my 200 acres, is demonstrate a place which requires no outside influence to grow foods. And it's not going to grow on a global scale or even on a local council scale, but it will be a demonstration of what can be done with minimal resources to provide good, sustainable health, not only sustainable for the environment, but also to sustain human life without having a detrimental impact on everything else that lives on that 200 acres, which is all of our other native trees and our other native animals. And also trying to demonstrate that if we still need to buy beef, because I like McDonald's just like the rest of us, but we also have areas that we've dedicated to raise cattle. as we increase our food production of native foods, we'll actually reduce the amount of cattle production that we do.
Mm.
So it's still using the land as what has currently been providing for the last, when we lost it in 1924 and got it back in 1998, and it has been used for cattle production. Over time, we are reducing those cattle numbers and raising the profile by understanding the land of what it can actually provide. So it's a lot of testing going on at the moment. But as we have those successful crops, that we will grow them on a larger and larger scale, share them with our immediate community. And as it becomes more viable or more recognisable that we're not actually really having detrimental effect on the land itself, and we can put more plants in there, then that will go out wider and wider and wider. And what I would ask people to do, that even with their own little small patch of land, whatever they might have, the little, 1/10 of an acre in their backyard, if they've got a house, to actually start looking at not only growing tomatoes. I love growing tomatoes myself, and cauliflowers and all the modern vegetables, but to start looking at how you can introduce your native foods, even if it's in one pot, and actually learn to taste them and say, you know what, this is pretty good. And if you find out through, and I work with AgVic and Melbourne University on identifying any of the characteristics that are beneficial for you health-wise, or if they're not beneficial, the way that you actually then prepare those foods to get the best nutrition out of them. So we're on a very start of a very early journey at the moment. But yes, if you can do that, and you can actually grow things local and only spread it local, you have a huge impact, particularly on transport. I'm really disappointed that I watched the areas of Pakenham, which is was border territory between Wurundjeri and Bunurong, which used to be very productive Victorian farmland, which has now gone under for housing development. And we are now, we're 80% reliant on Victoria's food source to actually come from the Queensland food bowl.
Exactly.
And if the transport system was to ever fail, then how would Victorians actually be able to support themselves in the food that we expect to find on our shelves every day?
Yeah. Well, greatly said as usual, Uncle Dave. And just a little tip, if any of you are interested in exploring native Aboriginal ingredients, there's this new business that I've been following that I really love, the Melbourne Bush Company, I think it's called. And they're on Insta, they're on Facebook, I think. But if you look them up, like they provide like conventional goods like powders and chocolates utilizing Aboriginal ingredients, and it's ethically sourced as well. So yeah, just a little tip there. Beck, I would like to hear from you next if you have any insights.
I guess I'm going to kind of riff off what Uncle Dave was talking about, but also, that though all of those tiles that are sitting behind Emma's head with the United Nations SDGs, and one of the reasons why I think the food system is such an important system, that it's the one system that when you're trying to do human and planetary health together, you always arrive back at the food system. And the Stockholm Resilience Centre says that the food system is the only system that you can do all of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals through. So I kind of think about the criticality. I think about kind of the food system. If you're thinking about the SDGs, it's like the acupuncture needle in two, multiple systems that kind of allows you to be looking at, all parts of human life and life in general together. And one of the things, I guess, I started life originally as a plant biologist. Whilst I'm passionate about science, one of the things that frustrates me about our current scientific, Western scientific method is that we break everything down into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller parts, and then we rarely join those things back up again. And so I'm really interested in how we zoom out and how we spend our time looking at the connectivity between things rather than the difference and between things. And so the opportunities that I think that we've got when we start to apply, holistic thinking across local areas, how do you start to reconnect all those parts of a system that are normally disconnected from each other? And how to put us as consumers, how to give us visibility of those things. Most of us, if we said, if we were asked the question, do you want to buy the slave product from the supermarket shelf, none of us would want to do that. But we have very low visibility often of a whole bunch of things that happen in our supply chains and our consumption habits that we just don't know about. So I'm really interested in how do we make all of those, how do we not only connect all of those linkages back up again and start to create integrated local food systems, but how do we also as consumers start to understand the decisions that we make, and what we put in our mouth actually makes a really big difference to not just ourselves but many other species. So how do we start to create greater visibility in that food system around the ethics of what matters to us, and both socially and environmentally? So supply chain decisions that when you rock up to your local supermarket and you pick up the oranges, that you've got line of sight that actually they're from California and it makes no sense to be eating them out of season. And by the way, did you know that there was some on your doorstep locally just from down the road? So I think we've got to work at both kind of the supply and demand end to start to connect things up. But I think that where it starts with each of us is us grappling with the ethics of what we put in our own mouths as consumers, and start to take responsibility. And if we say, well, we don't know the answer to what's actually on our plate, we'll go and start to hunt and go and start to find out the things that are on your plate. And the best way to start doing that is growing it yourself in your backyard, so you know where it's come from, or heading off to your local farmers markets on a weekend so you can go and talk to the producers and suppliers so you can get line of sight of that. So for me, it's around how do you bring the ethics of those decisions and make them real for us, so we start to grapple with these things ourselves, rather than just have all this stuff being someone else's problem and invisible to someone else.
Definitely. And I myself, honestly, I live in an apartment building, but I still do what I can within my means to, go about eating healthy and sustainably and ethically, like what Beck rightfully said, if you can't grow food and where you are, make the effort to go to farmers markets or your local big market like South Melbourne Market or Paran or the Queen Vic, that kind of thing, or even source online, is a growing market, e-commerce, food, all that kind of thing. So yeah, like to hand it on to Emma if she has any insights on this question.
Yeah, I'd just like to agree with Beck in the fact that we do have the power as consumers. We can vote with our mouths and our wallets. And I just think we have a responsibility, and we need to recognise that responsibility as individuals. And also going back to what Uncle Dave said is, comparing our food system to others in other countries. And it's really what makes us unique. And Healing Country really is a good lens. It certainly speaks to me and makes a lot of sense for us. So it's a compass almost for us with our food system to really understand and I guess lean on our Indigenous peoples to help them understand how we should be, I guess, growing food especially. And there's a lot of healing to do in a social and environmental sense. And I think that's we've got a lot to learn from our Indigenous peoples.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the key thing about what you said is the responsibility of it, that is really important, and that, you shouldn't fear it. You should take it on in your own stride, in your own capacity, and you know, like I was gonna save this for later, but I think it really fits into what you said, Emma. It's a great quote from Sustainable Table, and it mentions every dollar you spend is a vote for the type of food system and world you like to be a part of. That's what it comes down to. For every dollar you spend in your supermarket or even farmers market or local markets, like think about what you buy and what you will then consume. And finally, Gert, I'd like to hear from you as well on this question.
Yeah, thank you. I grew up in Belgium. It's a very tiny country in Europe, probably half the size of Tasmania. And the country next door is a little bit bigger, Holland or the Netherlands. And they're the largest food exporter in the world on a very small landmass. And in Australia, I feel like since the last 50 years or maybe even longer, Australia has copied the European way of agriculture and sort of infiltrated into general Western economy. And it's a type of agriculture that, even in Europe was very, very challenging, but it's based on a small land mass. And I feel like Australia's got so much more to explore. So if a small amount of land like the Netherlands can be used to become the largest food exporter, how can Australia scale back in land mass to actually become more efficient and productive, and actually open that land mass up, indeed, to go back to the indigenous way of growing food and managing the bit of body in that. When it comes to choice, I 100% agree with you, Beck and Emma. Also want to kind of challenge a little bit that people change when either the gain is big enough or the pain is big enough. And we're getting closer and closer to the pain being big enough and coming to a point where the food systems are going to collapse and we're going to have to change. So, and even though I believe in the goodness of humanity and people making all their own choices in a certain way, also understand that people go up and down and are motivated and demotivated. It's like if we're relying on that, it's likely going to take too long. So we also need to develop business models and incentives where we can make sure that the gain is big enough for people to change and to make different choices. So not necessarily have the answer to that, but it's very much, I think, in social enterprise and not-for-profit and for-profit in all areas to focus on making a bigger effort on developing a model that not only sets the example, but also creates an incentive for people to actually make the right decisions.
Great, thanks for that, Gert. And I think it's, we all, we do our best. And the few things that carry us forward is really our strong passion for food and our love for food, and especially for us, like, we just really want to take the step further and enact good within that as well. So, again, kudos to all of you who do that. And I just want to share some great resources just based on a snapshot of the Australian agriculture as of 2021 and an analysis of Australia's food security and COVID-19 pandemic as it is now. Links should be in the chat now, based from the agricultural government body. Just mindful of time, I might have to combine two of the questions later, but I thought what was very important and to the topic, I was wondering, what is your understanding of the current social innovation space within the food and agricultural industries? And even I am hoping we can delve into like even hospitality industry and even the growing market of nutrition, the nutrition space. So I think I would like to direct this question to Emma because she's in the food innovation space forefront. So Emma, would you like to take it away?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the right person to talk about that, or the best person to talk about this social innovation. Probably Beck can talk about that a little bit better than I can, but Certainly, at the moment, I mean, we just have to look at the situation caused by COVID and, you know, the food rescue, I guess the pressure put on our supply chains and food rescue organisations and, you know, lockdowns and, you know, people in Shepparton aren't as used to people in Melbourne as being locked down. So I guess, you know, from an innovation perspective, it's created opportunities, but from a social innovation, I guess, perspective, yeah, it's really put a lot of pressure on the system. So again, yeah, probably not the best person to talk about this. I'd like to actually hear from Beck.
Yeah, let's hear from Beck now.
I thought it's been interesting to watch the system just through the pandemic, and you know the pandemic has disrupted all parts of all systems, but we saw very early, obviously, that the hunger and food security became an issue right at the start of the pandemic. And a lot of the work that we actually did with our partner organisations at the social enterprises that we've collaborated with through the pandemic has been more in the food security space than what I would have traditionally been doing as far as training and employment pathways. So normally, you know, our social innovation is around who we engage in training and employment inside our enterprises. But what became really apparent, I guess, I was quite shocked because I haven't been part of the food relief system, and I was surprised that culture and really was playing such a small part in the food relief system. So when our the towers locked down suddenly, for example, in Flemington, and we had large numbers of refugee and migrant communities locked into those towers, there was nowhere that you could have speed dialed to say, hey, there's a really high number of families that are going to need halal meals. Or by the way, this is the cultural, you know, this tower over here has a higher number of Vietnamese and Chinese members in it. And this one over here has a higher number of African families in it. How might we try and ensure that families get access to the cultural foods that they're used to? And so I was really shocked. I felt like I'm sure it was there in plain sight all along, but it was something that I hadn't realized that often our food relief system, there's not a lot of cultural overlay to that system. So I guess I'm really interested in what are the things that we have seen break through this pandemic, and where are those things breaking, and where do some of those things have they broken that we go, you know what, they needed to break anyway. That was only a band-aid on those things anyway. And actually it's good that we've seen it, and the pandemic has created the opportunity for us to see where those cracks are. And so I think one of the really great things that we've seen, you know, from a social innovation perspective, is the localization of our food system and people starting to think about their neighborhood. What is, you know, I spoke to multiple local governments through the pandemic, and they were saying to me, we've got so much demand for community gardens. People want to, if they don't have their own, you know, backyard, or they're living in an apartment, people are desperate to put their hands in soil and start growing food. Yeah. Well, that's amazing. That's absolutely fantastic. So what do we need to do from the systemic perspective to make sure that people get access to land? I think access to land for growing should be a human right. You know, part of that food sovereignty approach, that not only do people get to choose the food they want to eat and the cultural overlay of that, but there's a right to have land to grow your own food. One of the things that I love is if you go to any of the community housing estate, the public housing estates, if you go into any of those community gardens in the public housing estates, it's like taking a trip through the United Nations. There is such an incredible diversity of food being grown in those gardens. So what does it look like to start to build local food economies that are vibrant and super short, you know, supply chains? So what does the neighborhood look like, you know, as a future place for not only growing food, but sharing and preparing food together? And so I'm also really interested in what might it look like in these coming years to be thinking about small batch production. How do we change production, and how do we localize production? And rather than our very kind of industrialized model of both growing and food production, what might it look like if we go back to small batch production in a local environment, from seasonally, with the food that we're growing in our local neighborhoods? And that's some of the work that I'm doing at the moment with our partner social enterprises. Each, if you imagine a whole heap of small social enterprises that each have different facilities, different skills, different equipment, access to different food, and also different waste streams and supply chains. What might it look like to link all of those things up together and start to create kind of hyper local kind of food communities? If I think about just the knowledge that we have, with our communities, obviously, as Uncle Dave's been saying, we've got all of this kind of First Nations knowledge that's there. But as a multicultural community, we just have so many food traditions here on our doorstep. So I'm really interested in what might new food communities look like that are hyper localized, where we start to think about the share economy and sharing resources and facilities and skills, and we start to do this in a kind of a more open innovation style of working. I'm particularly interested where communities come together and try and solve problems. So what might trying to solve some of our local food system problems look like collectively when, well, you might have access to land and you've got a great big backyard, but actually you're elderly now and you can't maintain that land. What does it look like when we start to build commons? So what do food commons look like, and food infrastructure commons, and where knowledge and skills and equipment and assets are pooled and shared in a system to make sure that everyone gets access to healthy and affordable and nutritious food. But the connectivity and all of us know how much food enriches our lives, and the bringing people together over food, how rich our lives are for that. How would we do that in our local neighborhoods? And I'm really interested to see how we can use the silver linings of the pandemic to be able to kind of hypercharge some of that.
Nicely said, Beck, as always. And there's just so much to unpack there, but I hope everyone here, and including myself, can resonate with what you have said and enact that change, or what's desired to, make a better food system here in Australia. I'm just conscious of time, and we only have 5 more minutes. So if Uncle Dave or Gert, do you have any insights on the current social innovation space within the food and agricultural space? Yes, Uncle Dave.
To the last two sets of comments, I think the social enterprise, you cannot overstate how important it is that food, which prior to the pandemic we did by going to restaurants to understand different ethnicities and different cultures, and with the closing down or not being able to gather in these eating places, and I do feel sorry for all those people who've set their lifestyle around that, but people are looking at what they can grow in the ground, and if they can't get it locally, where can they source the seeds and the plants and grow it themselves, and then sharing it. So I think what we're trying to look for is, rather than this global economy, or even a local economy as far as bush food social enterprise, or food enterprises in general, no matter where the food comes from, it's also about local ecology. So it's understanding you can't grow any food that you want anywhere that you like.
Exactly, yeah.
You can create spaces, as in raised garden beds, and bring in various soils and store fertilizers and all that sort of thing. But it's for too long we have been balancing, and I don't mean us here, I'm talking about the whole government, global government organisations and industry. We have been looking for economic gain out of everything that is produced. There's been no regard whatsoever for social gain
Yeah.
social net gain or health net gains, and no regard for the ecology as well.
Yes.
It's all been economy, and ecology is down there for too long. And the ecology is actually fighting back, not us as individuals, as humans, because we have control over it, but the ecology is fighting back. It's telling us to stop doing what we're doing. And this is what I know, talking to, amongst my elders and other TO groups from all around Australia, that in the first phase of the pandemic, Aboriginal people didn't get crook because we have these social enterprises where we get our people out on the land, which keeps them healthy because they're looking after their totemic animal or their traditional foods, has actually had huge health and social net gains. We actually did ignore it after the restrictions came off. And now, only now, is it starting to affect Aboriginal people with COVID. It's a warning from whoever your creator spirit is, everybody who's here, to understand that money is not the important thing. Absolutely, health, social, ecology, all of those things are important. And the very last thing we should be thinking about is the economy. It is the economy that has brought all this down. It's only very small, not a minimal amount of people making a lot of money out of foods. Now, when we talk about, so how do we share this wealth of food if you've got a bit of ground? If you want to give your food away, there are no restrictions whatsoever. As soon as you start to sell it, there are so many legislative requirements that will prevent you from doing that as a small scale producer, as I'm finding out with the bush foods that I'm doing. In the end, it becomes economically unviable to actually start doing it on a commercial basis on such a small scale. So yes, we do need to look at how you support small scale farmers. Aside from having to spend your 8 hours at the farmer's market on a Sunday for your 40 hours worked and you're relying on selling product, if you want to do it on a commercial scale and package it, there are so many rules that you have to go through that it actually deters the person who wants to do good for their community. It deters them from actually doing it.
Nice.
That is the biggest thing, because it's a threat to the global economy or the global industrialization of the food supply chain.
Exactly. Oh, that was, oh my God. Like, I really resonate again with all of what you said. Thank you so much.
So if we all want to volunteer and grow our own food and share it with our neighbours, and you just put all the farmers out of business and all that kind of thing, then that's fine. But we want to make sure that we're growing the right foods on the right country for the right reasons.
Of course. And I invite you all to check out hopefully you have a community garden within your suburbs. You can check it out through Sustainability Victoria website. I'm pretty sure they have a directory of community gardens and parks and whatnot. And generally, of course, they should be free to join in, and you can either contribute or you can, just help to grow the produce. And again, it's very sustainable and seasonal.
Sadly, the waiting lists are normally very, very long. So people can wait for years for community garden plots. So just being realistic that often they're in short supply overall.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for that, Beck.
That's right. There are some councils that are better than others in looking at the demand and finding places where these things can happen. But yeah, it's a complex way of doing things. Yeah, it's a huge change from business as usual. But it's always supply and demand. If people demand it, you will eventually get it.
Obviously, yeah, of course. Just wary of time. Before we go to Q&A, I would like to just get maybe just 30 seconds, please. Just a snapshot of this question, which is, what can current and future generations do to help shape a better food system? And this could even be following circular economy principles or regenerative food principles, or even within your social enterprises or businesses. What are the principles that reflect on your ability to shape a better food system here in Australia? And I think I'd like to start with Gert.
Yeah, good question. I think, yeah, most importantly is just get educated, and doesn't mean to be get a degree or anything, but like learn about growing your own food. It's and about agriculture in general and the food system. Education is an absolute must and a key, and the more people get educated, the better. Yeah, and take some action as well, and know that action is not something you do once on a Saturday, but when you take that first step into your journey, and that you continue for the rest of your life, and don't step into something you're just going to do for just once. But food and growing food and learning how to grow food in a regenerative and sustainable way is a responsibility. It's a responsibility that's everyone's, and a journey that's everyone's. So yeah, let's just take the first step.
Great. And maybe I'll pass it on to Emma now.
Yeah, I think just some of the things that we've talked about already is taking some responsibility, also being part of the conversation, I think is really important. Gert, I'd like to think I'd like to grow my own food, but I don't think that's going to happen. I've not got I think I've told you know that. I don't have a green thumb, so I'm happy to buy it from, my neighbour, let's just say. But we've all got a role to play, I think. And, one thing that I have been doing, which I'm really proud of myself, is, composting, like putting all my fruit and vegetable scraps and making the whole family do that. And it's amazing how we eat a lot of fruit and vegetables, amazing how many fruit and vegetable scraps we have, banana skins and all sorts of things, just huge amounts of it. But now it's going into the right place, and that's really, really easy to do. So that's, what I encourage other people to do.
Thank you, Emma. And then I'll pass it on to Beck.
I am an absolutely mad keen worm lover, and so I have it's about 250,000 worms as part of my household, a really large worm system, and I can't tell you the joy that they bring me. Oh my God. I only have a small backyard in suburban Melbourne, so I haven't got, a big sprawling, backyard. But the joy, particularly between my worms and also getting the next generation, getting my son involved as part of the growing. I'll give a shout out to Gert and Farm Wall, but during the pandemic, Farm Wall developed some really terrific growing kits and resources. And I must admit, my son and I, Will, he's 13, and we were one of the first customers of Farm Wall to start to doing some aquaponics at home. And there's just such a joy in that. Just nothing beats growing something from scratch and then cooking with that and eating that food. And so my son Will and we started just really simply, but even if you are in an apartment, even if you don't have much space, just even growing some microgreens or sprouts, just the basic, which will take you 24 hours to 48 hours to grow your first food. Super nutritious. So I would just say, find something that you can grow. And Emma, no one has to be a green thumb to grow their own sprouts, but that connectivity to our next generation, even city kids need to understand where food comes from, and that it doesn't come from a supermarket in plastic, understanding the connectivity. Because I think the second we are so disconnected from our food system, that's where so much of the ethics falls down, because it's out of place, out of mind, or out of sight, out of mind. And as soon as all those things are fragmented, I think that's where our ethics starts to fall down. So the more that we see it, the more that we care for it, I think.
Thank you so much, Beck. And
10 seconds, I'll say it very quickly.
Oh, yeah. Yes,
educate all of our children, not just us as parents, but in schools. Educate people about the food ecological cycle, not just what you can eat.
Exactly. I mean, like, I really enjoyed learning that even in primary school. And I was so captivated that I did my own further research as a kid, like buying my own sprout kit and whatnot back in Malaysia. Like, I really was intrigued even at a young age. And regarding like what Beck said, like, take it from me, I live in an apartment, but the sheer pleasure of like maybe even growing your own herbs or like tomato plant or lemon tree, like, oh, like, and you can like, there's so much use of it, like, and you just get so much joy, cooking with what you produce yourself. So I really encourage each and every one of us to do that. I'm wary of time, but I just wanted to provide some handy tips on how to go about eating healthy and sustainably and ethically. Firstly, eat local. Make sure you go to your local farmers markets, local big markets. Try to avoid supermarkets, but even if you go to supermarkets, try your best to buy local. And secondly, encourage yourself to cook as opposed to buying out. You'll find that you learn so much more about produce and the techniques and whatnot, and how you actually contribute to a better like food system even in your household. Thirdly, design your home menu to follow seasonality and availability of produce. So making use of what is already growing in your front yard or in your local market, that kind of thing. And fourthly, rotate food varieties regularly. So like, again, it goes back to the point of number three, where like seasonality and availability.
Yeah.
You want to have a variety in your daily, weekly meal plan. Fifth, waste less. We all know that. We can try to do the best we can within our vicinity, and handy tips that you can find online. Support fair trade. Consider the food's true cost. Like when you buy food, consider the true cost of what you should be paying for, as opposed to what is meant to be paid for. And go organic. Try avoid additives and pesticides, because that can greatly affect not just your health, but like the producer's health as well.
And the land's health.
And the land's health, of course. Thanks, Uncle Dave. And lastly, be willing to forego convenience. This meaning like, supporting a sustainable food system isn't easy, but when you commit to buying locally produced foods and fair trade foods, and, even adhering to other tenets of sustainable living, these conscious choices may cost you time and money, but ultimately you're working towards a greater cause that will ensure you pass on a healthy earth to future generations.
Yep.
And I'd like to end it at that. So sorry we couldn't have any Q&As, but I'm sure this has been a really insightful conversation. I'd like to thank our speakers, Uncle Dave, Beck Scott, Emma Coate, and Gert Hendricks. Thank you so much for helping me out on this event. And even to Steph and Cha of RMIT Activator for helping me facilitate this event. And to all of you who attended, thank you so much. And I hope you took a lot from this chat, from this panel discussion. And I'm honestly hoping to organize more, keep the conversation going. So if you're interested in conversations like these, I'm in the midst of planning them towards end of the year or early next year. So keep an eye out on New Tribe socials and website that's going to be launching soon. Thanks everyone, and have a good day ahead, and enjoy the sun while you can.
Thanks, Anisha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Lovely to see you all.